Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be discussing chapter 13 in your textbook, which is addressed to international innovation. As you might imagine, with a chapter like that, or with a title like that, this chapter covers quite a lot, and yet I'm going to try to deal with it fairly expeditiously, just because you're going to have an opportunity to read this chapter anyway. But I'll try to cover most of the important points, and then later on, either in this video or in one to follow, I'm going to talk about a couple of illustrations of international innovation, economic innovation, which has made quite a difference in the way business is done internationally. So first, let's just get right to work and talk about the chapter itself. So let me try to find it. I hope that's it. Nope, that's not it. That's one of the things I wanted to talk about after we're done with the chapter. There it is. Way down there where I couldn't see it. Okay. So I'm going to move by, as I usually do, the statement of objectives and so forth, and just get right down to business. One of the extra supplemental materials that I mentioned a minute ago will be a discussion of some research that was done in international corporations' research and development efforts. So I'll hold that for now, but it's the first topic that we see in this chapter. It's, as usual, it's pretty general, but I think we've got two important points down here at the bottom. Maybe I can just highlight those. I hope I can. Maybe I can't. I'm trying. Well, I'll put them in red. I think I'll put them in red. There we go. I have no idea what just happened. There we are. And I'm going to, I'll mention the one at the very bottom first, but basic research is addressed to discovering the nature of the world and the universe, for that matter. The nature, and we hear so much about it these days, especially. What are the nature of viruses, for instance, and so forth. Once that work is done, then applied research can be done by corporations that exploit science. Perhaps they specialize in chemistry, like Dow Chemicals and DuPont do. On the other hand, they may deal in aerospace and so forth. Even the formation of basic material, such as steel, every time, and metallurgy, every time we learn more about basic minerals, we sometimes find that we can add them in to the composition of steel to make it stretch further or harder more, and so forth. So in industry, we're more engaged in applied research, although firms such as 3M, for instance, get pretty deep into basic research as well. And some corporations have large laboratories committed to basic research with the expectation that that basic research will produce opportunities for applied research to take those new basic concepts of science and enable them to improve the products that we consume. So the text gets into a little bit of history. I certainly remember back in the 1950s and 60s, there were programs on television. Trying to remember, one was DuPont making living better through chemistry, I think was the word. Anyway, there was just a great deal of attention paid to breakthroughs that were being made in laboratories. And of course, those breakthroughs are still being made today, perhaps even at a faster rate, although some literature, some analysis suggests that basic breakthroughs are not appearing as rapidly as they did back then. Okay. So an interesting question is just what role should government play in fostering and supporting basic research? And of course, the very first bullet on this slide indicates that research for military applications is funded and supported by the United States government, as well it should, because in other countries, such as China, it isn't supported by the government, it's done by the government. So we just need to be aware that we're in a much more competitive world today. But one of the most interesting experiences that the United States has had in research and development has been in the aerospace program, which has sort of slowed down in recent years, but and is now seems to be picking up a little. But way back when the basic efforts to move into outer space were being made, the research and development projects resulted in all sorts of spin-offs that benefit us today. Sometimes they were less significant than others. I believe that Tang, the orange drink powder, was developed for the one of the early space trips. I'm having a hard time with my words here, but in any event, in the space program, all sorts of things have developed, including new rockets, new methods of generating power, and new approaches to measuring and monitoring biological characteristics, and as well as even diet. So governments can certainly make it possible for science to move faster, and they often do exactly that. One way might be to provide tax incentives, as this slide suggests, but other times it simply is done by funding grants to conduct scientific research and by agencies or corporations that are supporting the government, such as in military products and services. A whole lot of the internet was developed by military and was initially, I don't want to get into this too much, but the ARPANET before the internet was basically a collection of terminals that could reroute signals very quickly in the event that the United States was invaded and the communication system was attacked. So the idea was that we'd have several of these terminals around the country, and that message packets could be relayed through any combination until they finally found their way to their destinations. And those destinations had signatures or addresses, sort of like the address on your mail. Well, after that was accomplished, it became obvious that there was something much larger possible, and that became the internet. And so the government simply has lots of influence on research and development and the development of science. So when companies develop, have success in developing new products, new methods, new techniques, new substances, and so forth, corporations will want to protect their rights to that knowledge, and the law provides for them to acquire that protection of intellectual property, which comes in these four basic categories of patents, trademarks, trade secrets, and copyrights, and frankly, several other categories. But you'll find this exhibit in your textbook. I do not want to try to read that exhibit to you here. You would fall asleep and my eyes would fall out of their sockets. So intellectual property, though, is a source of great value. It's also a source of great conflict between nations, because different nations may want to acquire that intellectual property from international owners in other countries. So they may say they protect it, but they're also trying to get hold of it. And so I put the bullet at the very bottom of this slide. That was not provided by Flat World. And that is that once licensed, intellectual property is difficult for the owner to protect and control. So when a license has been written, giving a company in another country the right to use your patent or your process and so forth that's known only to you, then the cat's out of the bag. And when the licensee possesses that knowledge, there are all kinds of ways to cheat, one of which is simply to create another company, perhaps in another part of the country, with a different name, unknown to the licensor, and simply start to develop that process into something even better, and then exploit it, not just in that country, but internationally. So licensing is a very tricky business. I personally don't like it very much, but it's done a lot. World Intellectual Property Organization is a large organization that tries to coordinate and, as the slide says, harmonize intellectual property rights among countries and regions, regional organizations such as NAFTA or its successor, or Mercosur, or the CIS, or whoever. But it is still difficult to do. And the WIPO may help to exchange information and facilitate licensing. It can provide some legal and technical assistance and so forth, but it also finds itself dealing with disputes between two parties in two countries that both think they have a right to this process. Usually one is correct and the other is trying to justify acquiring it unfairly. So anyway, WIPO is important, but again, its mission is difficult. So how do we organize research and development activities? And the textbook suggests that a very important requirement is to make sure that research and development units around the world in an international organization use a common communication system so that they can interchange and exchange their progress, questions, and challenges in the various projects that are ongoing. But the one thing that hasn't been mentioned here, and I'll just mention it right now, is that indeed international corporations are now converting from the monotonization, that's not the right word, but the monopolization, monopolization of research and development functions at the parent headquarters. Pardon me, I'm going to get a cough drop. As you can see in the windows, it's evening here, and I've been doing videos and video conferences all day. So my poor throat is just about worn out. Just take a second here. I suppose I could mute this recorder and start it back up again, but there we go. Okay, so the first thing the authors suggest is that a common communication system is needed when you have all of these laboratories spread around the world. Nevertheless, and so you might ask, let me get this off for a minute because I think that there's some facts that just aren't discussed here. Why would a corporation locate research and development laboratories elsewhere than in their parent company's headquarters? Presumably, or at least many have heard, that science and technology is superior in this country. So why put it in other countries? And the answers, I guess, are several. One, it's no longer true that the best laboratories and the best science are located only in the United States. So throughout Europe, Russia even, China, we now see very good science, very good technology. In addition to that, some products that are made in the United States or consumed heavily in the United States may require materials that we don't have much of. So in different parts of the world, we find different minerals and materials. It's one thing if we want to purchase those materials from those countries and companies that mine them. But another possibility is to locate the laboratory where the minerals are the most abundant and do research and development on how to develop those products where, in fact, they are abundant. And when that research is productive, to develop production operations there so that we don't have to pay as much to ship those raw materials to the United States, and we can probably operate less expensively in some of those countries than we can in our own. So for those and lots of other reasons, companies tend to seek out locations for laboratories where raw material, where talented labor. There are many good universities outside the United States as well as inside. And sometimes, for instance, in chemicals, there are countries in Europe, Germany comes immediately to mind, that are excellent in chemicals. It's no secret that Switzerland has just about made an art form of pharmaceuticals and so forth. And then there's another variable completely, and that's markets. Where do we want to locate these laboratories so that they are available to support the development of products that are going to be distributed to the most attractive markets? And it may be that we need to locate those laboratories, especially to support manufacturing efforts in other parts of the world. So for all these reasons, the location of research and development, both applied and basic, but especially applied, has been much more worldwide than in the past. And this is true throughout industry, both American industry and otherwise. So let me get back to the slides now, but I think that's pretty important. I hope I get the right slide. Yeah, okay. So once we have this network, we then have these three challenges at the bottom of the slide. How to assess the value of a new idea when it doesn't occur at headquarters. How to encourage collaboration across these various units to develop the product most successfully and efficiently. We may have the resources, the talents, and so forth in one location, even though the idea sprung up in another one. And then project management, and project management is just critical. Oh boy, got to get this thing to advance. There we go, I think. Oh, there we are, okay. The next concept that is mentioned in this chapter is the so-called innovation hub or cluster. It's a concept that was developed by somebody whose name is mentioned often in my courses, Michael Porter. In this case, Michael Porter was examining international strategy and trying to figure out which countries had competitive advantage and where it was most likely that a new enterprise in a specific industry would succeed. Your authors have called these innovation hubs rather than clusters. It doesn't matter, but it's a geographic area where research, development, universities, government research, the supportive industries such as in telecommunications, transportation, what have you. But there's a combination of functions that if they come together will enable an industry to perform much better than it could in other nations. So they're focused on specific industries. They always have a well-qualified talent pool. And because they're all in the same geographic location, very often in the same city, people socialize. You know, they're people. So, you know, their husbands play golf. The wives do what they do together, go shopping and so forth. The kids go to the same schools, the parents meet. But the result is that there's a social interaction and discussions of things that create what the authors here call cross-pollination. Pollination? Oh. Anyway, the effect is that the folks in one company that perhaps purchase raw ingredients from another find out that the other company that makes the raw ingredients is developing a higher quality or a new type of material. And so that stimulates some further conversation and eventually some sort of an alliance. But this happens all throughout the value chain. A good example, of course, is Silicon Valley, where we have so many resources in the same location. Universities, engineering firms, lots of talented people, and so forth. And so this cross-pollination creates what is often referred to as knowledge spillover. Once you've got one of these clusters or hubs that is formed and is growing or has been completely formed, knowledge spills over from corporations to other people in the same neighborhood, in the same area, and without breaking laws, it simply creates a higher probability of productive interaction between the residents in that community. Here's a diagram, the one on the left, that is in your book. And there is a brief reference to Porter's National Diamond, but it's this kind of thing that makes me a little bit nervous. It would have been much easier simply to get permission from Porter's publisher to put Porter's diagram here, which is much more explicit. So let's see if we can equate these. Local firm characteristics. I think that's strategy, structure, and rivalry. Local market demand, there's demand conditions. Suppliers and complementary industries, related and supporting industries, and local market resources are factor conditions. Simply put, Porter, after doing quite a bit of research, discovered that countries that have the right mix of these four categories of ingredients are most likely to enable a new firm, especially in a particular industry, to flourish. Absent these factors, it'll be difficult. So very often, we're not just interested in the firms as they are today, but or in firms as they are when they're mature, but rather as they're growing, as they're developing, maybe just forming early on in the life cycle of an industry. In which case, what Porter recommended was that we look for countries that have the right combination of these four elements. And the most important, and the one in the bottom, is not strategy, structure, or rivalry, strategy or structure, but rather rivalry. In my strategy class, I take this concept further and show that there's a relationship between how an industry grows in its rivalry the intensity of competition. And when it gets up to a certain level on this axis, you know, if this is an axis from 1 to 5, this one's now at about 3. And the productivity of the industry and its growth potential goes up until we get to about the midpoint, moderate rivalry. And then as rivalry continues on, things get a little tougher until down here at this end, it's like dogs in the street fighting over a scrap of meat. Oh, way over here, where there's no competition, there's no intensity of rivalry, firms have no incentive to raise their game. So it's that moderate rivalry that we're looking for. So the textbook moves on to talk about types of innovation, process innovation, which is of a sequence of activities. And it may be that these or existing processes where you can improve the quality of processes, or as the slide points out, sub-processes. So it's one thing to talk about process innovation, introducing a whole new process that really changes the game. And I think it's at this point in your chapter where Procter and Gamble's innovation method is discussed, where experts who are trained to go look for unique ideas and methods travel virtually the world. Just they're given a certain region, and their challenge is to stay on top of things around the world in a particular industry and process. And when a new product or a new process, a new way of doing things is developed, that representative approaches the owner and suggests that they might want to bring their product, sell their product or their process to Procter and Gamble in this case, and receive some sort of a royalty for the increased use of that product in Procter and Gamble's large-scale production. Open innovation is a very popular concept these days, and it simply acknowledges that it may be possible to innovate and develop a new idea for your business by going outside your business and involving customers, suppliers, and sometimes even competitors. Also lots of consultants. But it's a simple acknowledgement that all knowledge about your process probably doesn't reside in your company. And so the question is, how can you access that knowledge outside your company and still stay safe in terms of competitive advantage? It's a tricky process, but it has attracted a lot of attention lately. So the textbook then talks about ways in which you might be able to tap in to some of those external sources. And one is to have a contest where some particular process, some improvement of a particular type is spelled out in specifications, and $1 million is made available to the first engineer that can come up with that. It might save a lot of time and expense, because the corporation might spend more than $1 million to come up with the answer. And in the process of running this contest, the company has enlisted the talent and energy and effort of perhaps hundreds of engineers. So sometimes that will work. And occasionally a big breakthrough can occur. Okay, now we have the question of entrepreneurship in corporate innovation. And we talked a little bit about that when we were in chapter 11. But within a corporation, there can be a social network that facilitates the exchange of ideas and development of process improvements. Social capital then is all of their intellectual profit, all their intellectual products and capabilities taken together. It may be that the user or the customer will suggest new ways for your product to be used or even produced. And so then here we are back with social networks and social capital. These folks who prepared these slides, I think, got a little sloppy near the end. And so now we come across something that's fairly important. And I think I'm going to go ahead and extend this session long enough to include bottom of the pyramid. I think I mentioned it in an earlier video, but the bottom of the pyramid in a country like India, India has about 1.35 billion people, and the people up here maybe are the 0.35. And so what do you do with this bottom of the pyramid down here? So a guy named C.K. Prahalad did a great deal of work in this area and became a great man as a result because he showed that it's possible for companies to be profitable serving the bottom of the pyramid if they develop the right methods. However, your textbook points out that very often, because it's so difficult to get costs low and distribution at a high enough volume for scale economy, that many attempts to serve the bottom of the pyramid are not profitable. I'm more impressed by what CK managed to accomplish and prove. He was a great strategist and also devoted to his country. So here at the end of the chapter, you've got 12 principles of bottom of the pyramid innovation. And these are just ideas that will get you moving in the right direction to serve the bottom of the pyramid. And so with that, let me stop sharing. I think that's the last slide. It sure is. This is a short chapter. So I'm going to stop sharing that and then hope to get lucky here. Yeah, there it is. Here's an article. If I haven't put it on your Moodle shell, I certainly will. I might add that it is written in terrible English by a local Indian guy. But he simply is trying to explain that it's difficult for people in that bottom of the pyramid to buy products that you and I buy in packages this big. This is an expensive product in India and rarely would be purchased except at the top of the pyramid. So how can people get Kleenexes or any of the other types of products that you see in the picture here? And the answer is that they are produced in packets. You've seen the foil packets, haven't you? They might include hand cream. The lady in India can't afford a big bottle of hand cream. That would be a day's pay and maybe a week's pay. So that's not going to happen. But can that same lady go into a small store in the village or town where she lives and buy 3 or 4 foil packets of that same hand cream? And the answer is yes, she can. And as you read this article, which I promise you I will put on your website if it's not there now, you will see that the Indian Institute of Packaging is promoting this idea of packets of small goods that normally in other more developed nations are purchased in larger quantities in larger containers. Again, his I guess maybe I'd like to read just a little bit of this, just among other things to share with you the quality of the English grammar. So this is not a highly sophisticated guy, but he's talking first about how Mrs. Smith in America or Europe buys shampoo in a bottle. He says, as you buy a good quality of shampoo bottle, you may have to pay 100 rupees. If you go to the poor population, which is the main population of the country, maybe his daily income is 100 rupees or even less. So first essential thing is not shampoo. First, he has to get his food and other eatables. He cannot afford a shampoo bottle, which may cost 100 rupees. But if you are providing him a 2 or 3 rupee pouch, he can easily afford. So as the article, and this is a very brief article, as the article goes on, approximately 70% of consumer products are sold in small pouches. So it's become a big industry, this pouch industry has. And as a result, the manufacturer who delivers these pouches in boxes, packages, containers, and delivers them to distributors who then distribute them to small stores throughout the country. Everybody's happy. The consumer gets something they couldn't have otherwise. The manufacturer makes large quantities and makes a profit, and so forth. As the article points out, many people in rural India are wage earners, and daily wage earners at that. And so when they get paid, they go buy what they need to eat that day. Very important that these products in these containers can be preserved for a long time in these foil packages. And as a result, they can be kept at home without, and the home may not have a refrigerator. And so being able to keep things in these safe, secure pouches is a real benefit. He says if you open a large pack of biscuit, it's very sensitive and may get deteriorated very fast, and as well as bacterial contamination. But if the consumer gets small packs of biscuits, edible oil, pastry, and all, he's happy to see that product is safe, and so forth. Then the article later on moves on to what has been transpiring with the Indian family. Families used to all live together mother, father, kids, grandparents, you know, everybody. But today, as India improves and develops, and the family sizes are getting smaller, this is no longer the case. In the old days, buying a little larger quantity, you know, it would take more than one family member to do it, made more sense. But today, these packets are more appropriate for smaller families. So the portion packs then, as the article concludes, have bridged the gap between rural consumers and consumer goods. And the rural consumers are getting access to these goods without having to pay the normal price or the price for a large bottle or box. So this is the way marketing and market development is one way that market development is occurring in underdeveloped nations or early development nations such as India. But there's several others like it around the world. And I think it's useful for you to appreciate that the way we do business here, and the way we do business in Europe, the more developed nations, isn't necessarily the way to do business elsewhere in the world. And yet, it's in those locations that growth potentials may be greatest. The growth potential of India, for instance, is quite high. So companies like Procter & Gamble and Lever Brothers and PepsiCo and so forth want to be positioned in those countries so that they're there when the market potential reaches its, or when the market size reaches its potential. Now, let me real quick, and we can really cover a lot of ground here. Yeah, there we go. I hope there we go. Chapter 13 talked about research and development. This happens to be a series of 4 slides that I used at another course that was conducted at a little higher level in international strategy. And these 4 slides happen to describe an article that appeared in the Harvard Business Review and by, I forget what the W stands for, but Cummerly. And it's based on a study of research and development functions in 32 multinational enterprises. 10 of them were in the US, 12 in Japan, 10 in Europe. 13 were in the pharmaceutical industry, 19 in the electronics industry, and altogether they operated 238 research and development sites. 156 of those were outside the US, or the home country, I should. All these companies were not domestic. And about 60% were relatively new. So the traditional model, as Cummerly points out, is to operate most research and development in the home country because that's where strategic decisions were made. But as he points out, this model, this typical model, wasn't being used as often. Instead, there was a new approach being taken. New knowledge was emerging in universities and firms all over the world. We've talked about that. But another thing that occurred is that the time between the discovery of a new product or process occurred and when it got to market, that time was shortening. So if the new market occurred in China or in just another country other than the US. And the research and development laboratories were always based in the United States. Then first the product had to be developed, then it might have to be modified for a local taste, and eventually transferred to the market in Europe or Asia or Japan, China or Japan or so forth. So the way to solve that problem is to put your laboratory where the market is. Large multinationals now establish networks, research and development networks in multiple nations. Oh, come on. So there we go. So here are the two types of research and development laboratories that typically are formed. One is called home base augmenting and the other home base exploiting. The home base augmenting model is a strategic device, or the home base laboratory. Yeah, is a strategic device. Its purpose is to participate in one of those clusters or in a region where some particular knowledge or technology or category of technology is prominent and seems to be developing rapidly, where there are lots of new ideas. So you want to locate a laboratory in that region and hope to benefit from some of that spillover that we talk about. But you've got to get into the scientific community. How do you do that? You find a highly regarded, hopefully renowned scientist to manage that laboratory. What will happen when renowned scientist arrives in the country? Answer: the other scientists in the country and the societies and so forth, they'll want to cultivate that person and invite him or her to speak at their local meetings and so forth. And as a process, in the process of doing that, lots of connections and friendships and relationships develop. And hopefully over time, that laboratory will begin to develop these items that this region is known to be most productive in. And eventually those products then, or those processes, whatever it might be, can be transferred back to headquarters. And so it's a home base augmenting laboratory, which means it augments what's going on at home. The alternative is the home base exploiting laboratory. In this case, it's the reverse. There may be manufacturing sites, depending upon the type of industry. There may be heavy marketing sites that need the support of engineers and applied research to develop the variations of the product that meet the customer's needs most specifically and most productively. So you have a laboratory at that location. And unlike home-based augmenting, which can be focused on pure research, this one is all about applied research. You want to locate it just as close to the market or to your comfortably close to, ideally, more than one of your manufacturing locations, so that that laboratory can support them on a cost-effective basis. Well, who runs this kind of a laboratory? It's not that famous scientist, is it? But rather, it's a very experienced product engineer who has a lot of respect of the manufacturing managers as well as the headquarters research and development and engineering managers, so that he can interact with them, or she can, to get the best result for the manufacturing operations and or marketing personnel where that laboratory is located. In this case, that engineer and the staff are exploiting the resources that are available from headquarters. They gain access to and deploy all that knowledge and all that technology. So it's a home-based exploiting lab. So here is Cumberly's diagram of how information flows. And you can see that on the left is the scientific community, and it's flowing ideas, knowledge, discoveries to the home-based augmenting laboratory. And the home-based augmenting laboratory has to reciprocate. So there's a community relationship here. It's not that there's just one arrow flowing from the scientific community to the laboratory, but the laboratory has to give back. It has to participate in the community. We then have in the center the headquarters research and development function, which takes advantage of what the home-based augmenting laboratory discovers and takes it further, incorporates it into its processes, and as a result, it may actually be able to give something back to the home-based augmenting lab, which can then give it under the right circumstances to the community. But meanwhile, the home-based or the headquarters research and development laboratories are able to provide knowledge and technology to the home-based exploiting laboratory, which can then provide support to foreign manufacturing operations where it is located, and to marketing folks where it's located. Lots of engineering people are called sales engineers. They're engineers, but their purpose is to support their customers by making use of their products and applying their products so that they meet the specific needs of customers, processes, and so forth. These are usually industrial markets as opposed to consumer markets. And finally, some suggestions to establish a new research and development facility leader. You can look at this. I'll be sure to post this on the website. I hope you can read this somewhat. Skills and experience will differ between the two types of laboratory. Nevertheless, both leaders will be respected for their abilities as scientists or engineers. They'll be able to integrate within their communities. They will know what the trends in technology are that they should be seeking to develop or to apply, and able to overcome barriers, organizational barriers or government barriers that present access to knowledge. They've got to be knowledgeable about what's going on at home, as well as the foreign country that they're located in. And then you've got some guidelines down at the bottom about what the typical or optimal size of laboratories are when they're new, when they're fully developed. But a couple of good points down at the bottom. Very small sites can't reach critical mass or command local respect. So got to be willing to make a commitment Very large sites, on the other hand, get to be what Cumberly calls cities, and they just get to be too cumbersome and likely to become productive as members of the community and as producers of knowledge. So with that, let me get out of this thing as fast as I can. There we are, we're back. So I don't know how long that took, but it probably was the same amount of time as reviewing a normal sized chapter. But I think that these two supplemental items will give you some appreciation of the texture of international research and development and international marketing when we're dealing in countries where average spending power isn't as high as it is in the kind of country that you're used to living in. The growth is going to be in those countries. It's going to take a while, but it's begun. India's growth pattern looks like this. The US growth pattern looks like that. China's looks a little bit like this. Japan's looks like that, and so forth. So it's important for a company to develop capabilities to do business in some of these emerging economies. And that's why I brought this extra material to your attention. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to you. Hope this material was helpful, and I'll be seeing you soon in our classes at 2 o'clock in the on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But because we've gone over this material here, we won't have to spend as much time there. Goodbye.